Ms. Shelton, you were here last year with the Someone to Watch Award. You're here this year for the Cassavetes Award. Are you disappointed the Cassavetes Award does not come with cash, unlike last year?
Hells yeah. No, it was great. The cash award I got last year really helped make Humpday. I mean, helped pay for Humpday, helped me live while I was trying to wrangle all the production for Humpday, you know, helped me go on press tour and stuff. So it was really helpful, and it's always nice to get money. But I'm perfectly happy with just the honor. This thing is heavy. I could probably sell it. I could melt it down and sell it for something.
Thank you.
Try to get in there.
You know, I watched the four of you walk the red carpet, and there was a real joy in what you got to say, and wanted to hear what you had to say. Has the independent spirit of words given all of you a voice that you don't get in another venue?
I'd say absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're not going to be at the Oscars on Sunday. So having a forum, you know, this event that is specifically just to celebrate this particular canon, this kind of work, which is all made independently, and encourages you to pick up a camera and go out and make this work without having to wait for, you know, millions of dollars in studio backing is really awesome. You want to add to that?
I just wanted to have a chance to have a voice.
Yes.
What has been the most challenging thing you've had to overcome in your career?
What's been the most challenging thing to overcome in my career?
What? What answer?
I mean, that's the thing that's so awesome about this kind of filmmaking is it's Humpday was self-produced. My second feature was also self-produced, and I looked at the resources I had at my disposal, and I, you know, asked friends for help, and I bartered and begged and pleaded, and I threw together a movie. And nowadays you can do that. I mean, you can actually shoot digitally, and you can, you know, if you write specifically to make a movie that's affordable, you can actually, you know, I cut out all the gun battles and the car explosions, so that was kind of a drag. But, you know, certain kinds of movies, character-based stories, you can really do it on the cheap, you know, and you don't have to wait for anybody to give you permission to make your work. So I can't really complain about any obstacles. I don't really have any. Yeah.
Do you think that Catherine's nomination makes a big difference for women in Hollywood, especially if she wins?
I don't know. I really want her to win, but that's mostly because I think The Hurt Locker was the best film in 2009. So, yeah, I mean, I think it would be nice for a girl to get the award for change, so yeah, it would be pretty cool. I don't know if we'll make it change or not. It would be nice. Anything else? Next question? Last question.
What? Congratulations. What do you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning of your career?
What do I know now that I wish I had known at the beginning of my career?
Snappy?
Something funny. Math. Math. That's good. I'll take that. Math. Actually, I don't know math now, so.
Well, we are pleased to have with us on the line of the Film Courage studio today, writer, director, producer, actor, and editor, Lynn Shelton. Lynn's credits include the just-released award-winning movie Humpday, My Effortless Brilliance, We Go Way Back, and many more. Hello, Lynn. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much,
thank you
Lynn.
for being
This
here.
is such a pleasure for us to have you here.
This is wonderful.
Lynn, I wanted to start today's show with a special connection that you and I share, and that is to the deaf community. My mom and dad are both deaf, and one of the first things that you emailed to me was that you have a deaf son. You know,
Yeah.
in our first correspondence on the phone just a couple days ago, I don't know. You know, you told me more details about what it's like to raise your son, and I was curious in terms of filmmaking. Like how do you think, you know, having a deaf son and seeing the world through his eyes, how has that impacted your storytelling and your filmmaking?
Well, you know, it got me, when you asked me that, it got me thinking about it because I haven't ever really thought about it before. I've never tried to. I mean, I know that someday I would really like to attempt to make a film specifically for the deaf community or for a non-hearing audience, somebody that a hard of hearing audience anyway, that is maybe even more communicates even more visually than through sound. I'm really sound is really important to my films, whether it's a very music-driven film, like my first feature, We Go Way Back, has tons and tons of music in it, and there's a lot of kind of deep dependence on the soundtrack and on the sound design as well. Or even just dialogue-driven films, like my last two films, there's still the music that does exist is really important, and the quality of the sound. I really love sound. But it's why I love cinema. I love both visual and sound. So the visual, trying to think about how to tell a story that might be of particular interest to deaf folks is something that I know I want to try to tackle at some point. And in terms of how I'm affected, it's such a I don't know. My son Milo is such a huge part of my life that I think it's just kind of a more of a subterranean, sort of under the surface effect that it has on me as an artist, because it's just affected me as a person. He's 10, and so the past decade of my life has been affected by living with somebody who is hard of hearing, and but I'm not very good at. I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't tell you exactly what it is. I was already, I've got a graduate degree in photography, and I've always been really visually oriented. But, well, the other thing that just occurred to me this very second is is getting tuned into what it's like to be different, because there aren't very many folks in the world who are deaf, and when you're living in a hearing world where the whole culture is oriented towards, towards hearing and listening and talking, and it's you stand out. You're different. You have to really get adapt to that, to being different. So having empathy, I think empathy really has been sharpened in me as a mom over these last few years for all people who are different or feel different in some way. I think that's another way probably.
Empathy, yeah. Now, where did you grow up? Take us back to the beginning.
I was born in Ohio. My dad always likes to make sure that I know I'm a Buckeye. But I spent very, very little time in Ohio and really was raised in Seattle, and ended up getting a theater degree at the University of Washington. And I lived in New York for about 9 years in my 20s, after I got my degree in the theater. And then went to school there for photography, got my MFA there, and then moved back to Seattle when I was pregnant with my son. So I've been back in Seattle about as long as I lived in New York, about a decade.
Were you artistic as a kid?
From a really early age. I guess I was dictating stories to my mom when I was like 4, and I remember writing my first poem and getting really serious about poetry when I was like 8.
Oh wow!
And keeping a journal. When I was 9 or it was like 10 or 11, I think I started a journal, and took my first acting class when I was 11, and was in. My mom put me in this really great art program that was very experiential and trying all kinds of, I remember making a sculpture out of this entire room and just stringing, stuff up across from corner to ceiling. And anyway, just really allowing my folks really allowed me to explore the artistic side of myself, and there was a lot of artistic sides of me when I was a kid. And then I kind of narrowed it down to creative writing and to acting and theater in my college years, and it kind of, the writing fell away for a while, and for a while I was just acting, and I moved to New York to do acting. I was really excited about it, but I started falling out of love at a certain point with it, and that was when I picked up photography again, which was something I had started when I was in high school, and I really sort of transferred my addiction. For me, it really felt like an addiction, like I always had to be in a show, when I was an actor. And so I just now, all of a sudden, I was just always in the dark room. And it's like my artistic expression has always sort of modes of expression have really shifted and morphed through the years. But when I was in the middle of making my first feature film, I was filming that 4 years ago in 2005, and I was struck like a, like a big bell. It was so clear that this is what I had, was always meant to do, was to direct with actors and make feature films. And out of grad school, I started making. In grad school, I was making film and video. It was the first time I started in the sort of early mid '90s as a solo artist. And I was making completely non-commercial, totally just purely expressive work, experimental and film and video art. I was sort of, kind of straddling between those two. And my one marketable skill was as an editor. So what was nice was I was making my own very, really exploratory artistic work, but I was working on other people's films, learning how to collaborate with other people and learning how to tell stories in a very straightforward narrative way. So especially when I moved back to Seattle, I started getting a lot of work as a narrative film editor, and I edited 2 feature films directed by other people and several shorts, and finally started feeling, like this is something I really needed to tackle, to try doing myself. And so finally got around to that a few years ago, and I've made 3 of them so far.
And can you take us into that process, Lynn, of getting that first feature film started? Can you go into more details in terms of how you got that off the ground?
Yeah, well, I'm almost sheepish to say, because I was so incredibly fortunate. I had an opportunity that I don't know very many other people in the world who have been able to be blessed to have, which is that there was a nonprofit film studio that had just started up in Seattle, and it was started by a really visionary guy who just had this feeling that, why couldn't you have a film studio that was kind of based on the same premise as a repertory theater company, and instead of putting on a cycle of 5 or 6 plays a year, you could create, 4 or 5 or 6 feature films a year, and they would be, existing forever. And it would be funded philanthropically, like the opera, like the ballet, like the theater. And so he ran around and got some big grants and some big sort of donations, and then had this little pool of people who were functioning as the key collaborators, so a director of photography and key editor and a production designer, a composer, etc. And then they would go and ask folks, they'd invite people to write and direct a feature film. And I was one of those lucky people. And fantastic. It was perfectly timed for me, because I'd been fantasizing. I hadn't really told anybody, but I'd been fantasizing about wanting to direct a feature film that was a narrative film. I think he thought that he didn't know this, so he thought I was going to make an experimental documentary, or something along the lines of the work I'd already been doing. And as it happens, I took the opportunity to write a script. I wrote my first script in about 5 weeks. I had something that was a very short timeline, so the whole thing was really crazy. Enough to pre-produce, to start casting, etc. And it was exactly the length of a gestation period from when he asked me to when I actually turned the project into submit. We submitted to Sundance and Slamdance. It was exactly 9 months. And it was my first time on a set, because as I said before, I sort of came into narrative filmmaking through the editing role, and so I'd never really been on a working set before, and so it was kind of like the cherry on the top of my 4-decade-long film school. But this was like my real intensive film school of learning about the specific hierarchy and collaborative nature of a feature film set. And the result was We Go Way Back, which premiered in January of 2006 at Slamdance and won a couple prizes there, the Best Cinematography Award and the Best Grand Jury Prize for Best Narrative Feature. Yeah.
Which is unbelievable.
That's amazing. How do you balance all of this, movie making and being creative? I mean, I have trouble sometimes just taking care of myself to get myself out the door in the morning. You're a mom and a wife. You've attended an MFA program in photography. I mean, you've been an editor, and you're writing and making these amazing films. Take us through your day. How do you prioritize what gets done, and how do you keep your sanity while doing it?
I couldn't. I'm every day, really. I'm incredibly grateful for the support of my, specifically my husband, my son as well. They're very, very supportive, and they kind of continue the culture that I felt when I was growing up with my folks. This idea. I just feel so blessed to be surrounded by people who believe that, we should all do what we love to do. That's, what we're put here on earth to do, and be the best we can be, And I hope that I am supporting him in the same way, in that emotional, psychological way. And sometimes it is hard in a practical way, but, it really has been, it's just kind of it's every day you have to make a conscious effort to think about the balance. You really do, So, of between work and family, between, sanity and insanity.
Right.
I mean, so I do get very, I have a tendency to be kind of high-strung, or I can get really anxious and kind of, high-strung, but I know that about myself, and so I really try to, I don't yet have a completely perfect regular yoga practice or meditation practice, but I kind of try to do a little deep breathing whenever I can when I notice that I'm getting a little bit, too over the top. I've learned to say no to things, which was really difficult for me for a really long time, and then I started realizing, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. I can't say yes to everything. I just can't, and so starting to just pull back and realizing what the limitations of your time are. And if things get really, ultimately inevitably things do end up getting really intense, but I try to make sure that if there's an intense 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of time, that I can schedule things out so they can be a little more breathing room over the course of the next week or 2 or 3, but yeah, it's just kind of a conscious, very deliberate and, effort to balance things.
You are listening to Film Courage. We broadcast live every Sunday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on LATalkRadio.com. We are on the line with Independent Spirit Award winner Lynn Shelton.
And I found something fascinating, Lynn, on your website that relates to your film We Go Way Back, which talks about something you term the Geisha Years in a woman's life. And I believe you say something to the effect of, during a woman's 20s, they almost replicate a geisha in many ways, sort of trying to please everyone but themselves. I found that very fascinating because I found that very true for myself. Can you tell me how you came up with this concept?
Well, it was actually, I can't take credit, and unfortunately I don't know who to give the credit to. I turned on NPR one day, and it was in the middle of a sort of a lecture, a talk by a woman who was in her 50s, who's a writer, and I never did find out who this person was, but she was characterizing different decades in her life, and it was right in the middle of working on my first film, which is really about that exact syndrome. And she just perfectly articulated what I had been trying to capture in that film. This sense of, just this sort of loss of a sense of self, and really, just kind of trying to please everybody around, being a real people pleaser, especially men, just really trying to please men. And when I looked back, I wanted to make that movie because I was in my late 30s and I was looking back at the different selves that I had been at points in my life, and I had this, I'm sure, over-romanticized vision of myself as a 12 or 13-year-old as just being so vibrant and kind of clear-eyed, clarity of vision, like really knowing what I wanted to say and being just filled with creativity. And then at the end of my adolescence, the other end, of getting into my adulthood, I was sort of the opposite. I just I lost all of my agency, and my secret, shame was that I could only be an artist as an actor because I didn't have any words of my own. Basically, I needed to speak other people's words, and it was the only way in for me to keep connected to a creative place. But it was I mentioned a little while ago that when I was in the middle of making my first feature film, I really had this strong sensation that this is what I was always meant to do, and I really transformed. It kind of transformed me as a person, as an artist. I really felt like I was coming into my own. And the thing is that I don't think I could have done it earlier than 38, 39, because I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the confidence, and I didn't have the agency when I was in my 20s. And it's sad, but it is something that I've noticed. Luckily, not all women have to go through that, but I have found a lot of other women who have felt that they sort of went through a similar period in their life for whatever reason. Being female in this culture can, I think, be a kind of a hard thing.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lynn.
Yeah.
You know, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that'll be inspiring for some of those listening right now. You know, one thing I wanted to touch on as I was thinking about this interview last night, I'm like, you know what, I really wanted to get into mumblecore. You know, a lot of people in the mainstream, they're still not aware of mumblecore. How would you define mumblecore to a general audience?
Well, you know, sadly, it's interesting because that term is just so immediately negative to me. I mean, it just sounds so awful. You know, and I wish to God that it had been given a different moniker, because I think for a lot of folks, they hear it and they're just sort of immediately turned off because they think it's a bunch of people sort of mumbling or something, which is totally not the case. But you know, aside from putting the unfortunate name aside, it is the name we've been sort of saddled with, and so we'll deal with it. It represents a community of filmmakers, most of whom are friends of mine, who have not been waiting around to be given permission to make their films, but they look at the resources at their disposal, and whether it's, you know, $3,000 and a bunch of friends, like Joe Swanberg in his early 20s. When I met him on the festival circuit with Week Away Back, he was on the festival circuit with a film called LOL, and he was really my first introduction to this kind of movement or this group of individuals. And he had $3,000, and over the course of 8 months, with his buddies on the weekends, you know, they made this film, this really delightful film filled with incredibly naturalistic performances. Like, I just never seen anything like it. And I had been fantasizing about having a very actor-centered set and having a very, you know, trying to put people at ease and make it feel almost like a documentary. And here was a version of that, and it was very, very inspiring to me personally. And so I had already been putting together this recipe where you would start with people that I wanted to work with, as opposed to writing, you know, a script first and then trying to cast from that script. But the most inspiring thing about it to me was that DIY aspect, that you could actually just pick up a camera and go out with friends and make a movie, instead of, you know, waiting for, you know, trying to put together a really commercial project, you know, a script, and then go into development and just wait maybe for years for somebody to hand you money and, you know, and give you permission to make a film. It really, I loved the empowering aspect of just being able to go out and do it. But the other things that the mumblecore, quote unquote mumblecore filmmakers are considered to have in common is that a lot of these films are being made. There's a lot of handheld camera work. A lot of times, this is not for everybody, but a lot of them is sort of one of the characteristics, the broader strokes that you could say, is that a lot of times there's handheld work that it's feels very cinema verite, you know, and it's a little Dogma style. If you think about Dogma in '95, that, you know, was a movement that was prevalent a while ago, has some of those characteristics. Extremely naturalistic acting. Sometimes use of improvisation in some form or other, although some of the mumblecore filmmakers have scripts that they stick to. What else? That's the main thing. DIY, very naturalistic, and a lot of times they're very small stories. They're intimate stories, you know, stories of people, and they're, you know, trying to relate to each other, maybe love stories, maybe friendships, maybe people in, you know, sort of post-collegiate angst. Mine is, you know, tend to be post-collegiate angst. Both of my films, my second and third films, are about people in their early 30s. You know,
And do you think Humpday is the film that's going to bring mumblecore to the mainstream?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to be so presumptuous, but
Yeah.
we'll see. I mean, it has definitely been getting a lot of love from the press, which is I'm just incredibly grateful for and humbled by. It just opened in New York and New York and Seattle on Friday, so it's in the midst of its opening weekend, and it will be rolling out across. I think it's scheduled to open in about 30 cities right now. So,
That's awesome.
San Francisco and Berkeley on the 17th, and Los Angeles on the 24th, along with a lot of other ones. You can see the full list of theaters and cities it'll be playing in on the website humpdayfilm.com, I think is what it is. It's through Magnolia Pictures, which is our distributor. Anyway, so we'll see how much more it expands beyond that. I mean, to give viewers an idea, our listeners an idea. We opened in 2 theaters on 2 screens, and Bruno opened in 2,700.
Oh wow!
So, we are a tiny film, and to say that we're being brought to the mainstream is a bit of an overstatement at this point. But it's possible. It's possible. It could be the first mumblecore crossover. We'll see. I mean, there have been other ones that have received a lot of love. I mean, the Duplass brothers. Mark Duplass is half of the Duplass brothers, and he is one of my stars, one of the Humpday stars. And one of the reasons we bonded was because he is considered in that same canon as DIY filmmakers, and so we had a lot of mutual friends. And when we actually met, we found that our filmmaking philosophies were very similar. So his first breakout hit was Coffee Chair, which also premiered at Sundance and got a ton of love from the festival circuit and from press.
Indeed.
And also got a wide distribution and Netflix. And his second film as well, with his brother Jay, called Baghead, also was picked up by Sony Pictures Classics, and it opened last year and got broad release as well. So Humpday is by far not the only, not the first to forge this trail.
Yeah, 2 great films. And I noticed that your films, Humpday and My Effortless Brilliance, seem to focus on male friendships, which is a subject that I also find very interesting because I notice that men relate with each other differently than the way women do in their friendships, where, like, if men feel kind of threatened of another friend, they kind of almost challenge one another to a duel, in basketball or chess or something. Whereas women, it seems like when they're threatened of each other, they kind of just, shut off and, sort of stonewall each other. What is it about these stories of male friendships that kind of draws you to make movies about them?
Well, again, you can trace back the fact that those 2 movies are about men to the fact that I wanted to start with a person to work with, and those people happen to be men.
Okay.
So that was kind of really how it happened. I mean, somebody asked me recently, "Are you just fascinated by men?" And I said, "Yeah, I really am." But I'm also fascinated by women. I'm really fascinated by people. I really am, And it just happened to be that that I hit a 2 for 2 in a row. Happened to be focused on men, but my first film my second feature, My Effortless Brilliance, was the starting point with Sean Nelson, who was a friend of mine, and I just thought would be a really compelling sort of center of a film, and built the whole thing out from him. And that film really has no women. I mean, there's one tiny scene with a woman in it, but for the most part, it's these guys off in the middle of the woods without, the nearest woman might be like 200 miles away from them. It really is about sort of this world of these particular guys and how they relate when they're alone. But I have to say, with Humpday, although the focus is the 2 men and this relationship that they have and male friendship, I believe that it's just as much about marriage, and the one woman character in it is a very strong woman character. I mean, actually, there's a couple of minor supporting roles as well who are women, but the key one is Ben's wife, the character played by Mark Duplass. Mark Duplass is Ben's wife, Anna, and she is, although doesn't get as much screen time, is absolutely crucial to the film's the way the film works. There wouldn't be any stakes in the story if you didn't care about her, and she needed to be just as fully fleshed out as the guys. So I always feel the need to point that out, that the film really is about, marriage and about this particular woman as much as it is about the guys.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, you've completed 3 feature films. Which of the 3 was the hardest to make, and why?
They all had their challenges. And I probably, we go back, the first one was probably the hardest just because it was so new. While I was on set, not only were we dealing with, we had this wonderful, all these resources, a wonderful full crew contingent. I don't even know how many people it was. I think it fluctuated between 30 and 50 people on set a day, all incredibly talented, hardworking, wonderful to be around. We had a 35 millimeter film camera and stock, and we had, a nice grip truck, and we had all this stuff, but we had such little amount of time. We only had 16 days to shoot a feature, which is just not a lot, when you're doing it in the traditional way. And I was absorbing so much information. So at the same time that we're working, so hard and so fast, I was also learning, like, oh, that's what a gaffer does. This is what a first AD is responsible for. And I mean, it really was it was like a hardcore film school for me. So it was very intense and, but absolutely exhilarating. I remember telling somebody that it was, this period of time feels like, I don't think I've ever been so stressed out in my entire life, and I don't think I've ever been so happy.
Interesting.
It was that. It was just this incredible combination. And it's interesting because it's never been as hard since then, but it's also never been quite that same crazy manic level of
adrenaline
just
rush.
sheer exhilaration and joy. It's been pretty darn deeply joyous. I mean, I love being on set, and I really love every aspect, especially with Humpday. I always edited all my own work, and Humpday was the first time I ever worked with an editor, and it was, for me, doing my first feature, it became all about, suddenly art making became all about collaboration and relationship. My experimental work, I'd made, 10, a dozen films or something all by myself. I really did everything. Maybe had one key collaborator, I'd work with a DP or I'd work with a musician or something, but really just one. And I would do everything usually by myself. I'd usually shoot and edit and interview and do sound design. I do it all myself. So I know, ever since we go way back, I know I never want to work alone again. I love working with people who are going to bring the best out of me, and I'm going to bring the best out of them, and, looking for those special chemical relationships that you can have with creative collaborators to make something that's going to be better than the sum of its parts, right? Just something that's going to come together in a way that you couldn't have made it happen all by yourself. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. And so, yeah, I feel like I've built on that. I've sort of evolved my own particular process to kind of key into that deeper and deeper and deeper. And the last thing I did with Humpday, what I was trying to get around to mentioning, was that Nat Sanders was invited. He came in as the editor, and it was the first time I've ever allowed collaboration in the editing room, which was the most difficult one. I'm a real control freak, so every step of becoming collaborative has been really difficult for me, and extra exhilarating, I think, because I am such a control freak. But it's been so, I've always had such a huge payoff. The more collaborative I've become, the more the better the end product. It's really been amazing.
That's great to hear. You are tuned in to Film Courage. We broadcast live every Sunday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on latalkradio.com. You can also find us on iTunes, search Film Courage, and subscribe today. Lynn, how has it been for you to receive all the praise and attention? When you Google your name, just pages upon pages pop up on there's a lot of buzz surrounding Humpday. You've been traveling the festival circuit. You've been giving interviews. How has all the positive attention been for you? How has it transformed you?
Well, it truly has been like a Cinderella story. I mean, all the goals that I set out for this latest film were exceeded long ago. I mean, they were met, and they've been exceeded, beyond my wildest dreams. I've been telling people, I'm really glad that my first feature film didn't get into Sundance, and didn't receive this kind of, acclaim, just because I feel so much more ready mentally. I didn't know anything back then, And I've learned a lot on the regional festival circuit and meeting a lot of other filmmakers, meeting programmers, meeting, getting sort of little regional audience fan bases here and there over the years with my last 2 films. And so by the time I actually got to Sundance for the first time this year in January, I was so grateful and so, not taking anything for granted, I don't know, I felt really, and I also felt really, like a year ago in March of 2008, I premiered my film, We Go Way Back. Not We Go Way Back, My Effortless Brilliance, my second feature film. And when I got there, it was the biggest film festival I'd been to at the time. And I really felt like, wow, I am totally failing my film at every point, because there was so much press and industry there, and I wasn't getting any interviews. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't have a network. And so I learned a lot. I realized, wow, if I get into this festival again or a bigger one with my next film, I really have to be ready with some, I have to have some backup. I need a publicist or a producer or a sales agent or somebody to really, help me navigate all of this. So that's what happened with Humpday. Not that long, 9 months later or whatever, I got into Sundance, and I knew that I had to hit the ground running, and I needed to get people in place, and I needed to, I needed to be ready technically, and so I just felt more ready. And then, but what happened when we got there was just, again, beyond our wildest dreams. The fact that we got into narrative, the dramatic competition, first of all, blew all of our minds. We thought we would be in Spectrum or another section. And, we were the only film, I think, that well, no, that's not true. There may have been a couple. Sin Nombre was sort of one of them, too. But one of the films that, we hadn't been in the labs. We didn't have any name actors. We were really the most truly independent film in that section. And it was just, people really responded well to it. The audiences were full, and they laughed, and they loved it. The programmers were always very supportive, and it was just a totally, a quintessential Sundance fairy tale experience. We got a special jury prize there, and everything that's happened since then has just been overwhelming. But getting into Sundance, as with a feature, really changes your life. I have an agent and a manager now. I never had one of those before, either of those before, and I'm talking to just really exciting, wonderful producers in New York and LA, and it's been very, very heady. But I really tried. Really, it's as grateful and happy, and as I felt, the humbling aspect of it is just as high. And I think about all of the other talented filmmakers that I know who deserve the same number of accolades, I'm just incredibly grateful, and I'm trying to take it day by day and really not, I just want to be as grateful as possible.
Mm-hmm. And when you started out with Humpday, deep down, what were your true plans with it? Were you making a movie just to make it, or did you kind of wanted to have it take you somewhere? Where does it get to kind of beyond the point of making a movie is not enough and you want to get to the next level?
Yeah, no, I actually, from all my feature films, well, that's not true. See, my second feature was really an experiment to see if I could find a way of working that would be a totally actor-centered set, meaning that I would have a set that would be so stripped down and so natural feeling to be there that it would just put the actors at ease, and that I could get just pure, there'd be no false notes. I was looking for just pure naturalism, again, almost to the point where it feels like a documentary, like it's just the things, the conversations, the events are all just unfolding in front of your eyes naturally, and it feels totally unwritten. And that was my big focus with that film, was My Effortless Brilliance, was to see if I could get that kind of, get some kind of a working methodology. And so the only people allowed in the room when the shooting is happening are the camera operators, because there's 2 people holding cameras, and me if I'm not holding one of the cameras, which I often am, and the sound guy, Vinny, and that's it. It's just the barest crew, and we're holding cameras one of the reasons they're handheld and they're small is because I wanted to be, very unobtrusive. I didn't allow any lighting instruments. It was very Dogma style on My Effortless Brilliance. There was no extra lights allowed. And yeah, it was just a very, very naturalistic setting. And then the actors all use their own words. So we have an emotional map for the scene. I know what I want to happen in the scene sort of emotionally, but they need to come up with the words themselves. Because I know that the words they're going to write, as, a guy in his 30s is going to be able to speak like a guy in his 30s, which, much more so than if I were to try and write his own words for him. So that was my goal with My Effortless Brilliance, and I wanted there to be a film at the end of it. But my main goal, like plot, wasn't as interesting or it wasn't as important to me. I wasn't thinking about those things so much as how can I get these performances, And the fact that I had this delightful, I really love that film and I love the little twists and turns it takes. But my next film, I wanted to really, it was like, okay, I know I can do this now, And so I had much more confidence and I had a much surer hand, in terms of how to work with the actors. But I also wanted to up my game in terms of the movie-going experience. I wanted to be a little more classic, like a little more Hollywood, a little more like, sitting down and you're just going to be drawn through this film with a strong narrative drive, the sense of what's going to happen next. Somebody recently described it to me as almost like a bank heist movie because the question is, will they or won't they? Are they going to go through with it or not? And you're wondering all the way up through the end. So I did hope to make a film that would actually be fun to watch and would be, might be, the crossover hit. At the same time, for me, that I sort of breakout film. But for me, the thing is that this film was such a huge risk. The premise is so absurd. The idea that these two straight guys come up with this art project in which they make a gay porn together is such a ridiculous premise, and it sounds so unbelievable, We had tried to develop this film in a classic way where you're looking for investors and you make a business plan and you're pitching to people. I don't think the film ever would have been made. It certainly never would have been made the way that we were able to make it because it was such a huge risk. We were very skeptical that it would even work, But if it didn't work, who would be the wiser? It was just me and a bunch of friends in the hinterlands up in Seattle making this little film, and it would have died a nice, quiet little death, and nobody would have had to know. There'd be no shame. But so because that's what's so cool about making a movie in this way, where the stakes are so low, that you can. You can just take the hugest risk and take the biggest challenge. And the only reason the movie actually worked was because even though we were skeptical that we could succeed, we all dove into it completely headlong, wholeheartedly, fully engaged. And, if the two guys hadn't had that level of engagement, especially, it just never, ever, ever would have worked. So, yeah, I can't say enough about empowering yourself to make movies that you want to make, and going out and pleasing yourself, because you don't have to, if you don't have anybody to answer to, anybody who's worried about, how commercial is this film going to be, then I think you can really make the best movies that you can make,
Absolutely. I love the way you're articulating it and discussing it. It's fantastic, Lynn. And Karen and I, we have seen Humpday, and we laughed out loud throughout the entire film. It's a very funny film.
Very funny.
And the thing is, while I'm watching it, I'm kind of bummed out to ask this question because I thought when I saw the film, like, all right, I have something that probably no one else is going to ask her about the fact that a lot of the film is shot in close up. And I guess you have been asked this question throughout, but I'm still curious. Why did you choose as a director to say, you know what, I'm going to shoot a lot of this in close up? What was some of the reasoning behind that?
Well, the main reason is I'm in love with the human face, and so it's kind of a dead giveaway. Looking, right at what I prefer to look at. I guess I'm a little like Peter Weir in that way. I remember when I was in my youth watching Picnic at Hanging Rock and even The Year of Living Dangerously, these Peter Weir films when he's just, nobody does a close-up, Witness even, nobody does a close-up like Peter Weir, and you're just staring at these people's faces. I was always just like in love with that aspect of his films because I felt so close to these characters, and I felt like I was really mining the depths of their souls, And I love that he didn't shy away from that, from the human face. And I think we have a lot in common in that way. My films, especially Humpday, is really about the nuances of human interaction between husband and wife, between two male friends who really want to connect, but it's kind of a love-hate relationship, really. There's so much going on, and there's always so much going on under the surface of the words. So you've got their dialogue, and then you've got, the looks on their faces and reactions and little nuances, what's going on behind their eyes. And I just didn't want the audience to miss any of that, that's really where the drama is taking place, is in their faces, to me. So that's why it's so close up. It was funny because I was just in Chicago for a preview screening about, a week ago or so, and I saw it on the biggest screen I've seen it on so far, and it was one of those theaters. It was kind of a newer multiplex. It was a very raked, steep audience setup, and it was really comfortable chairs, but you were really close to this gigantic screen, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is really looking close up now, I was like, I think somebody's probably going to ask me about this, because it looks like you could just, crawl up into one of their nostrils and live there for a while. It's crazy how big it looks on a huge screen, but I'm really glad I shot it that way.
Now, Lynn, I wish we could just continue with this conversation on and on and on. We're gonna have to boil it down to this last couple questions here.
Sure.
Now, Humpday was one of the last. I mean, as you mentioned, Humpday was one of the true independent films at Sundance. And beyond that, it was one of the few films this year to walk away with distribution from Sundance. So, in that vein, it is a film that gives a lot of independent filmmakers like myself hope that that there's a chance for me. Is that something that crosses your mind? Do you say to yourself like, wow, I'm inspiring other filmmakers out there?
Well, that makes me really happy whenever somebody says that to me. And I get messages about that quite often. Folks saying this story is a really inspiring one, and I'm really, really glad. We were totally ready. I was completely ready to self-distribute if necessary, to do whatever it took to get this film out. And there are, luckily, ways to do that. The distribution for independent films in particular is pretty. The distribution prospects, for traditional distribution companies, they're getting narrower and narrower. Those outlets and those companies looking for films, and it can be really disheartening. But luckily it seems like there are also ways, there's more kind of, it is possible to get your film out there yourself as well. There are more ways than one. You're not completely dependent on those companies. But again, I don't know if this is the last film I'll ever make I know it's not the last film I'll ever make, but the last film I ever make the first and last film I make that gets bought by a distributor. I have no idea what's in store, for the industry or for myself. So again, I'm not taking anything for granted, but I am very happy to hear when anybody says that they're inspired by this story. It's a great feeling, because I think anybody who wants to make a film should go out and pick up a camera and make a film.
And lastly, let's just touch upon, because it's starting to roll out in theaters now. It's in New York City this weekend. It's in Seattle this weekend. How is it doing thus far in its theatrical run? And
it's doing pretty darn well. Yeah, it's really exciting. It's showing at the Angelica Theater Film Center in New York, which is, when I lived in New York, was my favorite theater. Went there all the time, and so I was just in New York, and I'm taking pictures of the coming soon, my movie poster in the coming soon slot,
so cool.
And just thrilled beyond belief to see it, and see the trailer show before a movie down there. I mean, it's very surreal for me, and it's showing in my favorite childhood theater that I had when I was growing up in Seattle at the Harvard Exit here. And I've been doing Q&As, and the audiences are loving it, and we were sold out. We got a standing ovation on Friday night. It was very
awesome.
Joyous and wonderful here. And supposedly Angelica, the reports I'm getting in New York is that it's also doing well as well there. So I don't know what the figures are yet, but it's looking pretty good.
Congratulations, Lynn.
Very cool.
We're just so happy for you and so
Very
excited.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
We really are. And we want to thank you.
And thanks so much for having me. This has been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you
for
being
on.
We hope to get you on, and once again down the line and hear
definitely.
what you're up to. We've been speaking with filmmaker Lynn Shelton. Lynn, once again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And Karen, I guess this is where I turn it over to you.
Okay, well, our quote of the week comes from yet another talented female filmmaker, Nora Ephron. Ephron's films Silkwood, When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, Heartburn, and many other titles delve deep into the problems that plague relationships, infidelity, trust, and whether men and women can really just be friends. Ephron makes a statement about romantic relationships in movies. Referring to couples on the big screen, she says, "It struck me that the movies had spent more than half a century saying they lived happily ever after, and the following quarter century warning that they'll be lucky to make it through the weekend. Possibly now we're entering a third era in which the movies will be sounding a note of cautious optimism. It just might work." Whatever type of movie you're making, whether it be romantic comedy, sci-fi, or adult fantasy, David and I hope your ending finds your audience better than before they walked into the theater or started the DVD player. Have a great week.